Okay, so thank you all for joining us for our third Sunday Salon for the Inspired by Great Artists. Before I start, I want to thank those who made it helpful. Tina Chung, who really deserves a lot of thanks because her computer started crashing at 11:30. She went and got an image for each of the artists that you used as inspiration. Talk about commitment. Thank you, thank you. And of course, Laura and Bob, who always are there to make sure things go smoothly. Thank goodness. Okay, fourth, I want to thank all of you who participated in this exhibit. This exhibit was so fantastic. As I started making my list of who, which would we highlight, I started going, and I wasn't eliminating any. I wasn't eliminating any. And I started panicking. These were so good. When I went back to my list, I still have all these people on it that I love their work. I would love to talk about their work. This was so good, so amazing. And it was also so much fun in some ways because I would look up the artists and it was like a treasure hunt. Who these artists, some of these I didn't know, and some of these I didn't know the specific period. And so you too can go back and look through these artists and just say, wow, these people go through many stages. It's not just the stage that the art book says, like somebody's doing Rothko. Rothko now we have somebody that's representing Rothko, but Rothko went through lots and lots of stages, just like all of us. And it's so much fun to see the biographies of people and see different images. And so I encourage you to take that kind of, I call it a treasure hunt. So I'm going to start now with all of this much ado about whatever. I'm going to start with Susan Kenny. And one of the reasons I'm starting with her, because she honors one of the founders of the Plastic Club, Jessie Wilcox Smith. And what a great timing for that. This is going to be the 125th year anniversary of the founding of the Plastic Club. And I'm going to share with you great news. In recognition of the historical importance of the Plastic Club in establishing opportunities for female artists at a time when there was gender discrimination, which may not have ended yet, the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office approved a historic marker for the club. You know, all those signposts you see when you're walking around with people that, you may not know? Well, we're getting one of those markers, and we're going to have a big celebration as soon as we are able to have, we're able to congregate and be able to celebrate. So anyway, it was great news. And so we're going to start with Susan Kenny on time. So just 2 or 3 words about Smith. She was an illustrator whose work was found in books like Little Women, inspired by Louisa May Alcott, and she was on magazine covers, including Harper's, Ladies' Home Journal, but particularly Good Housekeeping, for which she did all the covers from 1917 to 1933, 184 covers, and she would often get as much as $1,500 a cover. So her subjects were often children, scenes of motherly love, subjects considered fitting for women. So I'm going to ask Susan to explain why she chose Jessie Wilcox Smith, and also to talk about this project. I don't know if she's still doing it, but she had done this amazing project for a year that I would like her to just share for a few minutes. I would also like to say, in the corner you see the Jessie Wilcox Smith painting, and I actually like Susan's better. I like what she did with the background by switching where the sky is with the ocean, because it really highlights the girl much better, and I like her coloration. So kudos to Susan. So Susan, could you tell us why you chose this why you chose this great master?
Well, I do love Jessie Wilcox Smith, and I always, since I've been a little girl, she was one of my mother's favorites. She gave me this book, and she's just amazing with form, with color, and the composition is always exquisite. The reason I chose this one, it was just happenstance. I was in Salvation Army, and this was in a frame that was 8 by 10. So I needed a frame that was 8 by 10, and I bought this little piece, and I thought, well, it was hanging around. I didn't want to throw it out. And so I just did it because, I've been thinking about the Black Lives Matter thing that, you know, I can't attend those because we're sequestered here behind our walls. So I went in the studio and did this.
Well, I love the piece and I love your story. And you had a little poem by Jessie Wilcox Smith,
Oh, it's upstairs, Roberta. I'm sorry.
but you know I have it.
Do you?
Isn't this why you named it Time, because of the poem?
Well, the poem is called Eternity. And I just thought, you know, it's time. It's time. So if you want to say the poem, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of your inspiration. It won't take too long. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make the mighty ocean and the pleasant land. So the little minutes, humble though they be, make the mighty ages of eternity. So she said it sounds old fashioned, but she liked it anyway. And that sounds so much like Susan Kenney. So Susan, would you tell us about that year-long project?
I pretty much paint every day. So I just decided that I would. And then I would do that. I'm sorry, Roberta.
That's
Painting
okay.
a day, that's not a new thing. People are doing that. That's been a thing for a while.
Oh, it's okay, but I'm celebrating you doing it. I mean, I thought that was pretty amazing. It was inspirational to me, and I started to do it, but I couldn't quite do one a day. But I found that really very inspirational. So I just wanted to share that with everybody else. And you could see some of the selections on the website. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go to Janice Moore in the Mist, and her inspiration is Whistler. So many of you are familiar with Whistler's famous portrait, you know, it's called Whistler's Mother, but it's really composition in gray and black. But most are not familiar with his nocturne night scenes, which are some of my favorite. And as soon as I saw this as her submission, I said, be still my heart. I love the night scenes. He's also, Whistler, besides, he's known as an artist that started, or part of this movement, Arts for Art's Sake. In other words, we're not talking about morals. We're not going to talk about history. We're not going to talk about political. So I wanted Janice to address both whether she sees herself as an artist for art's sake, and also about her inspiration with Whistler and her use of that pastel. Her painting's in pastel and it's just so luminous. Janice? You have to unmute if you're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, let's try again.
Okay, good.
I'm definitely a person who makes art for art's sake. You know, I'm just interested in what I'm doing and concentrating on that. Let's see. This work actually was done in 1991. At the time, I was doing a lot of plein air work. And for a time, I did about 25 works of the New York Harbor from the vantage point of Staten Island. I actually developed a new way for me of applying pastel that would give me a very light and gentle effect. And so I use that in this particular work.
Could you describe that? Can you put it into words?
It's scraping the pastel onto the support. And then what's great about it is that you can scrape more than one color and then actually blend it on the paper.
Oh, great! I'll have to try that. Thank you.
Can I ask what you're blending it with, Janice? Your fingers or brush or something?
I get my hands into it.
Great.
Looking at Whistler definitely influenced me, but I wasn't trying to do a Whistler. The morning that I did this work, it was very, very foggy, and I loved it because, you know, things were ambiguous. You looked at something, maybe that was a building, maybe it wasn't. And so I just kind of incorporated what I did see. Um, I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, I think the fog is, you know, he did a lot of scenes of the London Harbor. And I think like you, Whistler was very inspired just by, I'll call this local inspiration, just by working in the fog. And he was really depicting what he was seeing with his very thin, chirpy oil. And they're very, very good. I mean, there's a whole downstairs in, I think it's the Freer in Washington, D.C. They just have a whole gallery full of his stuff. And if you have a chance to see it, it's just wonderful. If not, look it up. They're so, so inspirational. And your work is fabulous. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your technique.
Thank you very much. Let's see, there is a Whistler in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And that's one that I saw up close and personal.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that too.
Sure.
So number 4, Elizabeth Mcdonald. 4. It's hang in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. Oh, that's me. Yeah, we're going to have a Picasso. Sorry. Okay, so there's a few others with Picasso, but I'm going to actually focus on Sarah Nathan on hers. But I just wanted to show you, look at the 3 different ways that people were approaching Picasso. If you look at Michael's, I went and just sort of diagrammed it. This was really quite an exercise in using simplicity for complexity. If you look, he has 3 big shapes. He has that purple background, he has that white hair, and he has that big face and neck. Those are 3 big shapes that he then made complex through using Picasso-inspired Cubism or other inspired Cubism. And he ended up having a really interesting piece. He also kept his palette really restrained. Basically, it's red, yellow, and green, and blue. Blue is, so I mean, it's a really very nice piece that made, like I said, complexity out of simplicity. And of course, David's piece is quite lovely and very, very nostalgic or very contemplative. And I went to look up the Bust de Femme au Voile Bleu, and his is, you know, he's humanized the woman in a really lovely, lovely way. So I would just recommend that you also take a look at that portrait. But Sarah's intrigued me because of this popping open of the head. I did see elements of Picasso's using like the African mask. He was very inspired by that. But, you know, she's really intrigued me by this approach. So could you talk about it? And also, you know, your title, Overflow. Sarah? You probably have to unmute Sarah. You have to be unmuted.
Here, Mike, is Sarah here? Do you know?
Yeah, she's there.
Yeah.
We can see her.
So this was from a photograph that I took a couple years ago and never used. It was actually a head plant stand in New York, but I printed out 3 photographs of it, and I had it down, and I liked it with all together. But then I had read a little bit about Picasso, and I tried to be, I couldn't be him, but from what I've read, he really wasn't a very nice person. And he, and all that passion and titillation went into his work. And I looked at it and I thought, you know, I'm just so overwhelmed now. I'm just going to open up this man's brain. And that's the freedom of doing that was really exhilarating. And in that way, I tried to pretend that I was Picasso, even though I think I'm nicer than he was. But he had so much in him. He had so much in him. He did so much in his life work, and it was. I could have just left this plane and put all the pieces right where they belong. But when I thought of him, this is what I wanted to do. You know.
Well, that's a great story, and you are nicer than he is. and I mean, I love your story about how you got inspired by not being him, but getting inside his brain. That's great. I was just very curious about this piece. So Michael or David, do you want to add anything else?
About,
Picasso and your influence?
yeah, well, Picasso in the 30s started to do a lot of little heads of his two mistresses, Dora Maar and Marie Therese. And I think he just sort of wanted to rework a head, you know, not make the same old face, but to invent with heads. And he did 50, 60 of these little heads. And so I had a painting, I have this painting that I did of Cynthia about 20 years ago. And I thought, I guess it's reversed. I don't know how you see it, but I did a line drawing from it that just simplified the main parts to this face, and then created that painting with the putting in the white hair, which you all know if you know Cynthia.
That explains the simplified shapes. That's
yeah, it just is like a line drawing in a way that I colored in a sense, to just break it up in a more abstract form. Yeah, it was.
So again, there's local inspiration, both his wife and a painting he did of his wife. I'm just plugging for the next exhibit, if you can tell.
Yeah, local inspiration is really easy. You're right. It can be anything we're seeing, really.
Right.
So that's what that painting is.
Well, thank you. David?
I don't have a picture of the original painting I worked off of, unfortunately, with me. I have it in the other room, but I really wasn't trying to, replicate the painting that inspired me. I can't pronounce the name of it. It's been so long since I've taken French, but what I was really inspired by in the original painting was his use of the color blue. It's not a blue period painting, it's,
right. I was surprised. I looked it up and I thought it was going to be blue. I was all set to say, and it's much earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think it's 1924. Is that later, I believe, in the blue period?
That's later.
It's later.
That's later, yeah. I believe it's later, but
Later.
And he did some paintings in the 20s where he would use sort of like, in the original painting, I wish I had it with me, and I don't, unfortunately, but it's in the other room. The woman has like a head covering that comes down to like here, and he doesn't paint the whole head covering. It's like a smattering of blue, and it's such a beautiful color, the blue he uses. And honestly, just seeing that was what inspired me. I said, I want to do a painting with some blue in it, but I don't want it to be, it's not a blue period painting. It's not like the whole canvas is some shade of blue. And it was honestly just that smattering of blue, which the original painting has more blue than mine. And I just loved the blue so much that I wanted to do something with it in sort of in a way that wasn't the main focus of the painting, but part of the painting.
Well, you did a nice job, and also the orangey yellow certainly picked up and emphasizes the blue.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I had wanted is just to show you that there are different approaches that you can use by being inspired by Picasso. And we're going to have one as we go in later. So I thank you all for.
Yeah, and the last thing I just wanted to say is this woman in my painting is very different than the woman in the Picasso painting.
There's a similarity in the frontalness and somewhat of the shape, but
I think there's some similarity in the mood, but it's a different woman, and I wasn't trying to copy or replicate that.
Well, you're an artist.
Yeah.
You're an artist, and of course, this was to be talking about being inspired, not to copy.
Exactly.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna go on to Elizabeth Mcdonald.
Absolutely.
Because I have people that are gonna be dropping out later, but thank you.
You're welcome.
This looks like party. All those blops and drips and ropes hanging in there. So this was inspired by Jackson Pollock. And one of the things I want to ask Elizabeth is, when I first saw work by by Pollock, I said, oh, that's awful. That's ridiculous. That's what children do. This is not art. And now he's one of my favorite artists. So I'd like you to talk about your reaction when you first came across Jackson Pollock, and does Pollock and his methods come in other of your work, and how does it come into this work?
Well, when I was a teenager, I first saw Jackson Pollock, and I thought, I took to him.
Huh.
And I just thought, this is great. I mean, I knew it was a mess, but I liked it. There's something about it that speaks to you. So I went home with my oil paint and thinned it out and tried to do it. It's not that easy. And mine did not inspire anybody. So by itself, it wasn't anything. So I use it as an adjunct and combine it with other things. I often spray thinner, which eats white holes. I dribble things, I sponge it, I scrape it with credit cards. I do different things for different textures. And one piece of work might have several things in the same, on a different textures in the same piece of work. And there's one piece I did on my kitchen floor, which I don't know if you can see it or not.
Check my audio device. What happened?
I'm not very good with computers.
But hi, you're back.
There we go. Sorry, we're back. Yeah, there's the this is on
Well,
Betty's.
yeah, this is the, whoops. No,
We're not going to have a clear picture of it, but you can talk about it.
and this is sponged, and I did the border the same way. It was red with just black on it. So I used, he opened doors for me to think I didn't just have to stick with brush strokes. I could do other things. And that has changed all my artwork into just breaking rules. And I still use brush strokes. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly good. But sometimes it's just nice to be able to do different textures and things in certain spaces. So I've always been grateful that he sort of opened a door and window for me to go in a different direction.
What a great champion for Jackson Pollock. And I love that your reaction was so intense and so inspired right from the beginning.
I have a question. How big is the piece? How big is the painting?
Oh, it's not that big.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what would you say, 1620 or so?
I see. Thank you.
I think this on the website, if you go into the exhibit, the actual size of there, I can't remember it either. But I would have to say is, Elizabeth is a inspiration all the time. Is when she's in every exhibit, you can see just all the ranges of styles and mediums that she is courageously embarking on. So thank you for what you said about Jackson Pollock. I liked what you said about he freed you and liberated you from brushes all the time, and also the reaction. Thank you. 5, or Elke Muller with respect to Rothko. So he was a Latvian-born artist, and it was very interesting to read his biography because we all think of Rothko as these shimmering rectangles emanating light, but he went through so many stages and before he was able to find what was a voice for him. And in fact, these big rectangles, he thought of these as expressions of human emotions. And he started painting even larger and larger canvases because he wanted to envelop the viewer in the experience of his painting. And just that was the emotion, the viewer and the painter. So, okay, certainly captured the color fields and the light. And if you can talk about how you selected Rothko as your inspiration and how did you capture these beautiful luminous colors and what are those little dots?
Okay. All right. Thank you. I had taken this photograph a number of months ago, and about 6 weeks ago or so, I had seen an excerpt from a play about Rothko. And it was very good because I wasn't that familiar with him. And I wish I could see the whole play, but anyway. And I had not seen this picture that you have up here, but I had looked into others. Anyway, this photograph I had taken out of a window when it was raining. And those little dots are drops of rain. And then the back part there is mist on the window from the rain. And then I looked at the Rothko play, and then I remembered I had this photograph, and I thought I could probably do something with that. So I changed the coloring in Photoshop, and there you are.
Well, there you are. It's a beautiful piece. I loved it. As soon as you open it up, you say, "Oh, Rothko," and I love that you had inspiration from a movie on Rothko. I mean, these they can be very inspiring. The biographies of these artists.
I hadn't realized that he had committed suicide, which is rather sad.
And got darker and darker.
What's that?
Paintings got darker and darker to being very, very, very black paintings.
Yeah. So anyway, there you have it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to have another very luminous painting. John Stritzinger, moored in...
Stritzinger.
Stritzinger,
yes, like Zinger.
Zinger, okay, I got the Zinger.
Zinger, yes.
John Zinger.
Close enough.
Moored in Minnewaska. Did I do that one wrong too?
That sounds pretty good.
Okay. So he was, John was inspired by the English-born American painter Thomas Cole, who's credited with founding the 19th century Hudson River School. And they're known for their romantic portrayal of nature, its ruggedness, its sublimity, expressing belief in God and the notion that man and nature can coexist. And Cole would sketch from nature, and then he would go back into his studio to finish, which is probably what John did. So this is very different. If you remember, John was the one who did the skaters at Town Hall, those blue painters with the blue skaters with the white lights and stuff. So this is a very different mood. So obviously he's able to use the camera and its capacities for moods. So could you talk about this photography and what you did with it and who is that figure?
Sure. I was up in the Hudson River coming back from 20th anniversary with my wife a few years ago, and we came through Lake Minnewaska, and as we got there, the fog started rolling in, this thick fog, and it was just gorgeous. And interestingly, when we got to the lake, it so covered the lake that you really couldn't see the lake. It was such thick fog, and we were on a walk around it anyways, just to do it. And I came across this scene that it was just this incredibly still lake with the fog, and took the photograph and loved the photo, but it kept calling out for something else. And while it doesn't have the sort of overwrought romantic look of all those Thomas Cole and others in the Hudson River School, it was in the Hudson River, and I like the landscape idea of adding a figure. And I thought, it looks to me like it's the kind of place where someone could have been stuck. They got lost there, they got stuck there, and they couldn't get away. Perhaps their ship had wrecked. So I took some other photographs. The woman is from a human figure shoot here in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. And I like the fact that it had kind of a, who is this person? You're not quite sure. So hopefully there's a little storytelling and fiction involved.
Right.
And the ship is from a wreck in Scotland off the coast in the Highlands, and the birds that you can see in the sky, if you look a little close, used to wheel above a church in Tobermory, the Isle of Mull in Scotland. So putting together this, I like the idea of putting together sort of that fictional story that makes you think. And certainly the Hudson River School folks, they would add little tiny figures into their scenes, like an Indian or someone, you know, just to sort of do it as you're illustrating in the picture you have there. And I don't have the mountains and the incredible light that they throw into the background for the romantic feel, but
the fog
like,
is very romantic.
yeah,
and it's very light. I mean, it looks like from the romantic school. It does.
yeah, so that's kind of what inspired me, and I enjoy putting together this image, giving it that sort of painterly feel to it, in a sense, you know, coming out of that school.
Well, I loved your discussion of the narrative in there, and I think you leave it so open that it's a narrative between the work that you created and the viewer. It's not a in your face, this is the picture, here's what you got to think. This is really quite an interesting picture. I mean, I definitely was puzzled by what is the figure, who is the figure, what is this boat?
Good. I was kind of hoping people would have their own endings to the story, or the start of it, you know, is the person coming to see who's on the ship? Is the person off the ship waiting for something? You're just not sure.
Right. So this is well done, and it was, I love the Hudson River School. They are amazing, and their interest in the when they put Native Americans in there because they think they're closer to God, they're more original, they're freer from sin, kind of thing. So they actually have they endow a lot of meaning in there, just like yours has meaning, and meaning changes over time. So thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear how you put it together. Very, very creative. Laura Stork, God Bless America. I mean, this was, the next couple of paintings were just so dramatic by their very interesting uses of contrasting values in being in black and white. And so they all just grabbed my attention because they were so strong. Laura says that she was influenced by Robert Frank and Lee Friedlander. And these are two extremely influential photographers. Lee Friedlander helped establish an urban language of storefronts, reflections, and structures that are framed by posters and street signals. And though one of the interesting things about him is among his famous photography, for some people anyway, are the black and white photos he did of the young Madonna in the 1985 version of Playboy. Very different than his artwork, his other artwork. He also did an extensive series on parks. Robert Frank was a Swiss-born American transplant, and he's known for his photography, videos, and photo montages. And his most important work, one of his most important work, is a book entitled Americans, displaying his photographs from his travels across the United States. And interesting, the introduction was written by a fellow cross-country traveler, Jack Kerouac, of On the Road fame. And the mutual friend of theirs is the beat poet, Jack Allen Ginsberg. Does this bring a lot of us back? So Frank's photos feature low lighting, unusual focus, bleak and lonely settings, sometimes very political kinds of commentation. So Laura, can you explain how you put all this together and the influence of these iconic photographers on you?
Sure. Several years ago, I became attracted to street photography and photographing mannequins. This photograph in particular was taken in Old City in Philadelphia, in a store that's no longer there. But how it relates to Lee Friedlander, he did a lot of work photographing storefronts, and there are a lot of reflections involved. So he captured the urban landscape. He was popular at the same time as The Americans was published in the late 50s by Robert Frank, and his work was related to the social landscape, in which he traveled across the country and uncovered, did a lot of photographing and covered a lot of interesting views of America, a lot of what you didn't see advertised or out in the public. So here I think it you know, now, honestly, I don't know if I even knew about the Playboy. Like, it's not what I was thinking about with Lee Friedlander, but I'd like to see that. And I wonder, you know, because this body of work, in a way, also relates to the male gaze and the objectification of females in our culture.
Right.
One thing I did notice when I was doing this project, I photographed a lot of storefronts and a lot of mannequins around the city, that they vary depending on the location, where in the city, how lavish they were, what they looked like, whether they were headless, and also whether the mannequins that were in the windows, the storefronts, were very different from the ones that were nestled inside the store. So yeah, and also I did notice in my research that a lot of these photographers influenced each other, and there are others like Eugene Atget, the French photographer, and Elliot Erwitt was also popular for photographing mannequins. So interesting how everybody influences everyone else.
Well, but this is definitely yours, and definitely a very striking piece. I loved it. I have the next two that we're going to just briefly look at, because it sort of rounds out this period of influential photographers that worked in black and white. Neither artist is present for the Zoom, but they both kindly sent me back information about their paintings. So the first one is Angelo Benedetto's, and he was influenced by Paul Strand. If you remember, he's the one that did those wonderful sneakers and socks full of color. So he's very versatile. This is his black and white. And he was influenced by the 1916 photographs of Paul Strand, including one that was called Port Shadows. And he told me, in fact, this is actually his Port Shadows. But the photograph that I want you to look at also is the one in the corner that was by Paul Strand. This photograph was very, very important to a lot of people at the time. It influenced Harper, it influenced this Wall Street, it influenced probably Strand. They just were very taken by the geometry of the city urban landscape and the light that it was able to have. So I just wanted to point out Paul Strand. It's very interesting to look at his, he certainly has a lot of different styles also. And his 1916 ones are gorgeous and very, very influential. So if we can go to Mick Miserito's Boston Elevated. And he was inspired by Harper, Charles Sheeler, and Charles Demuth. And so his answer back to me was, I was fascinated how rail and industrial infrastructure collided into our daily lives in the 19th and 20th century. I still look at factories and railroading with boyish curiosity. Discovering the work of Harper, Demuth, and Sheeler showed me that working with urban subjects can be as legitimate as working with figures in nature. I thought that was such a wonderful sharing of his thoughts. And so we loved both of these artists. So he said, I didn't completely invent my composition, which actually isn't true since he put together a bunch of different kinds of things, and that's what invention is. It doesn't mean that you started it from scratch. He says, I was searching for scenes of vintage factory chimneys and came across shaky home movies of the Boston Elevated. I never knew it existed and found that the intersection of shipping, industry, and rail was irresistible. And actually, because I didn't even really notice that, in fact, we did have that intersection. So his discussion was actually very helpful for me to be a better looker. I'm not always as careful as I should be. So anyway, I appreciate that they took the time to share their thoughts. And those are such an interesting group of artists that they were inspired by. So Phyllis Weldon. So this is a beautiful painting, just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. She was inspired by Henry Rousseau, a post-impressionist painter who, like many of us, gave up or went on from his early jobs at a desk to become an artist. He was a custom officer until he was 49, and then he became a full-time artist. And he's best known for his naive or primitive jungle life scenes. He looked at children's books and Paris botanical gardens for inspiration. And he's been influential in a number of artists. Picasso in painting, Wallace Stevens and Sylvia Plath as poets, and musicians, Joni Mitchell. They've all alluded to him. So he was also influential to you, Phyllis. Can you tell us about this, these big, gorgeous organic shapes, and how did you approach this? Was this a photography? Was it a picture? Did you make it up? And how did you get your palette?
Well, you probably helped me remember that I probably found something in a National Geographic magazine. Of course, I actually started this painting in my university days at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I was studying painting. And, you know, I was fascinated by the exotic scenes of Henri Rousseau, and the fact that he walked among all the Impressionist artists, and yet he kept to his sort of naive, primitive style. But so even though I started it many years ago, I didn't finish it until I myself was well traveled and had visited tropical rainforest in Puerto Rico and Costa Rica and other places. And what's sort of interesting, other than the image itself, is over the years, this painting has changed many times as I finally evolved it into this image that I am satisfied with. At one point, it would have had birds in it and other kinds of things very much in the style of Rousseau, but I never was really happy with it. After I visited the Kew Gardens in London, and of course visited National Gallery and also the Musée d'Orsay to see Henri Rousseau's work, I ended up modifying it one time to make it look like it was inside like a arboretum or whatever those things are, inside garden. But I wasn't happy with that either. So after visiting the tropical rainforest of, like I said, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, and also even New Zealand, I finally decided on this as the final image. Now, the top part of the painting, because this is the shape of the canvas is very tall, it's 8 feet tall by 5 feet wide. Wow. It gave me some challenge in the composition. And I think that's probably why I struggled with it so much. The top of the painting really didn't change that much in all those years. It was the bottom of the painting, the lower half of the painting, that eventually evolved into what you see there. So.
Well, thank you. When did you actually finish it, or is it finished?
It is finished. I finished it about 2010. I started it about 1974 and finished it in 2010.
But that's also an inspiration. Keep at it. Don't throw away those paintings that don't seem quite finished.
Right. So, carry them around with you and work on them as you grow and evolve. Yes, absolutely.
How tall are you, by the way, for this big, tall painting? I guess you're on a ladder.
I'm 5'7", and yes, I would have used a ladder. Yes. I mean, I also have big easels too, but yes, a little step stool ladder definitely works. Over the years, I've also changed the size of my canvases because I had a storage problem. I started out in my youth painting very large canvases like this. And as life progressed, I realized that it was impractical and created quite a storage problem. So now I like to travel with watercolor paper.
That is a change. No ladder needed.
Exactly. Yeah. But this is an acrylic painting. I do acrylics, oils, and watercolors. So
it's quite lovely.
Thank you.
So 11 and 12, Arthur Brenner and Marie Sammartino. Marie, are you here? I didn't hear back from her, so I don't think she's here. We'll just use it to show different approaches from Richter.
I'm here.
She is here?
No, I'm here.
No, I know, but I was asking if, I want to know if Marie's here. I know, I figured you'd be here. So Arthur, I just want to do 2 words with Richter. He's hard to summarize as an artist because he's prolific. He explores everything. He does a lot of photography. He does large scale photorealistic copies. He has a lot of painting. He uses squeegees through them, which is more like Marie's painting. But what I'd like is for Arthur to talk about his painting and if he was influenced by a particular style And if his medium, it's a print, influenced how he actually went about this process. Before you begin, I would like Offutt to say a few words about the American Colored Print Society exhibit that's coming up. Very exciting, joint project with the Plastic Club and the American Colored Print Society. So Offutt, could you just give a few words?
Yes, thank you. For many, many years, the American Color Print Society has basically worked out of the Plastic Club. We have our meetings there, our monthly meetings, and each year we have an annual members show, and it's usually in November. It turns out, because of the pandemic, that we're not able to hang a show at the Plastic Club, so we are working with the Plastic Club, who very kindly is allowing us to have an online show on their website in November. And it will run from November 1st through the end of the month, and hopefully will be archived. Most of the people who have been in the Plastic Club for a while know the show and visit it very often.
Great show.
The show is usually on all 3 floors. It is terrific, and it will give everybody an idea of what original printmaking is. And our artists are professional artists. They're from all around the country, and they use a number of techniques. And you will see things in this show that you don't normally see in printmaking.
So look for the show, and we will, on our webpage, we will keep giving notices about it. It's always been one of my favorite shows, actually. It's always well done, well curated, wonderful work. And we're glad that we're able to still continue the partnership. We think Tina Chung is helping curate that exhibit and get it online. So really kudos to her and her efforts. So could you talk to us about your,
Yeah.
It's a screen print, right?
It's a screen print, and screen printing is all I do.
Okay.
I keep on my desktop often a file of work that I see online that I would really like to keep and think about and consider. And I've collected an awful lot of Richter. And what else is on screen is a sample of what Richter looks like. And he works very, very big. I work 14 by 20. But he works very, very large. And he uses wide brushes, but he also uses a squeegee sometimes to actually put paint on his canvas. And then I saw the film of how he actually deconstructs some of the paintings that he does. He uses that squeegee, which has a hard, plastic edge, and he kind of scrapes at parts of his canvases, pulling out the paint that is underneath, because he works in an awful lot of layers. And I thought to myself, gee, if he's doing that deconstructing or building something, I wonder if I could do that in printmaking, in screen printing with a squeegee. And so that's pretty much what I did with this. Working directly on the screen. I don't use photo silk screen. I do not use stencils. This was all ink that I put either on the screen itself or on the side of the screen. I pick up with a squeegee, and I put into a 14 by 20 space. And I think
If this was only one pull?
No, no.
You had a pull from different colors, right?
Yeah, this was 4 pulls.
Okay.
I think. But sometimes I will put multi-colors on the screen. I didn't do it on this one. I think this has 4 colors. I think it's yellow, magenta, probably fire red, and a blue. And then whatever happens with the colors, they mix. And I use short strokes and long strokes. I use small squeegees and a larger squeegee to get some of the things that you see, like the lines. I use a longer squeegee. But for some of the other things, I use something that's only a few inches wide.
So can you get additions? Are you able to get additions in this process?
What you get is a varied edition.
Mhm.
And I did like, I used to do big editions and found that all I've collected was paper, which all printmakers have in their basement if you do a lot of editions. But on this one, this is really the fourth, I think it's the fourth one of the group that I was doing. And by the time you get down to the fourth one, you always have residue on the screen. And so it tends to pick up a lot of things. The other three look nothing like this. But normally I will get an edition of 4 or 5. The palette is the same. There are some things that are common in each of the prints, and you know they belong together, but they are not exactly the same. It really ends up being a varied edition. But his work, pure abstract expressionism, is so complex. It's amazing, and that's kind of what I strive for to do in silkscreen, which he is doing in painting and partially almost screen printing when he uses that huge 6-foot-long squeegee to hack at what he's done.
Yeah. This is what's a lovely piece, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to enter in the show in November. And again, we invite everybody to see the show, and we'll remind you about that. Thank you, Art, very much.
Thank you. And something just disappeared from my screen. So block my voice while I try to get it back here. We'll go
on. Marie's look is probably her look, and I've seen her in various Plastic Club exhibits, is I think what she does is use a lot of that squeegee. Maybe she goes wet and wet, and she uses it to show underlying colors. And sometimes she leaves more areas visible, like the red. So anyway, it's just a contrast of styles between the paint and the screen print. So thank you. Okay, this one will be very interesting. Tina Chung, Stay Plucky, My Friends, by Goya. And I'm not going to give the Spanish, because if I can't pronounce people's names, I'm not going to pronounce this title. But the translation I could do, There They Go Plucked. And this is from a series of 80 images in which Goya explores superstition, sensuality, greed, violence, as well as his dreams and nightmares. Wow. So he's been very influential to many artists, including Picasso and obviously to Tina. So Tina, there's a lot in this painting that layer after layer of meaning. Can you unlayer those meanings for us, Tina, including that title?
There are a lot of layers, and they're not that resolved. Like most of the work I've been doing this year, it's kind of my take on the lockdown and being in isolation.
First, could you tell us about why it's in tar? You use tar. Can you explain that?
Yeah. One of the things I hadn't really thought of cognizantly is I've been using tar in my work for like 20 years. But you wouldn't know it because the way I've used the tar has changed over the years. Originally, my work was more sculptural and thicker, like Furrier's work. And then it's gone different. So now I'm just using it as a very light wash over Mylar or Yupo paper. And it gives this like really rich, thick, atmospheric look that I love a lot. So yeah, I've been really exploring this recently. And then, yeah, I've just been finding myself recently thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and what my role is in that. And, you know, if this wasn't 2020, I would be out on the streets protesting. I used to be active socially, and I'm in a situation right now where my household is a little compromised, so I can't take the risk. But it was like, well, what am I doing when I'm in lockdown? So this became kind of a self-portrait. It's my fist with my tattoo. And I just love Goya's, these little plucked men that were kind of in the interpretation of his etching, sort of little corrupt men that the women are chasing out of the room. So in my mind, they were the little corrupt senators that we'd like to see go away soon.
Right on. Right on.
Yeah.
And you also have something about the tattoo?
Yeah, when my dog Milton passed away, or when he was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago, I got a tattoo of John Milton's quote on my arm. And the quote is, freely we serve because freely we love. And it refers to John Milton's Paradise Lost, when the angel Raphael is talking to Adam and Eve, and he's explaining the difference between angels and humans is that angels were created to serve God. They don't have any choice. Humans were created, like it's version 2, they have a choice. Well, we all have choices. We have free will. And so whether we serve a God or a good, I'm not religious, but the right path, is based on our choice. So we have to take that into consideration in our life. We don't have to do good. It just seemed kind of appropriate for today's political age.
Well, that was an inspiring piece. There was a lot in there. I was just, when she kept unpacking the meaning, it was just really very interesting. And the idea of tar on Mylar sounds very intriguing. So thank you. I just saw tar. What's going on? So, Alan West, I hope he's here.
Hi,
Alan.
thank you.
Oh, yes. So Alan West did, it's called Milky Bunny, inspired by Gerhard Richter. And at first it looks like a fuzzy image. It is a fuzzy image on wool and silk. And then you can see this bunny. And that's the effect that he wanted, this fuzzy image. So I looked up Richter to find out about, did he have anything called the Milky Bunny? And the only Milky Bunny I found was by his friend Sigmar Polke. So I said, aha, I think I found the source of the information of his inspiration. And as you will find, I was wrong. Polke actually had done a whole series on Playboy bunnies. Here's these Playboy again. Playboy had just opened up in East Germany. And so he started taking these pictures, and he would obscure these sex symbols by putting smudged dots on them. And he would, he called them the Nelke bunnies. So I thought there was a bunny, it was called Nelke bunnies. I was sure I had the right source. So I write to Alan, and boy, are we gonna get a different story. So Alan, go for it.
Sure. So yeah, I read that email and was like, oh, this is fascinating, and looked a little bit into that. So Nelke was actually the last name of my great-grandfather, who owned a knitting mill in Philadelphia. And they produced a lot of dolls that were just cheap stockinette dolls that sold for like $1 or less. And I didn't find this out until only a few years ago when I moved to Philadelphia and started to explore that history. And then as for the inspiration, I first encountered Gerhard Richter from the documentary, which was made much later in his career. And so his thinking at that time about photographs and sort of family history and memory was a lot more complicated than initially when he was making work that sort of stylistically resembles the knit piece. And so it was a lot of thinking around sort of this play of objectivity, subjectivity, the responsibility to our personal history and sort of the greater history, and sort of simultaneously attempting to transform the medium of knitting somewhat, which has been an on and off experiment I've been doing for about a decade.
So you knitted this, correct?
Yeah, so this is, it's a process called double knitting, where you knit the front and the back stitches at the same time, which allows you to move color totally freely, and it becomes structurally stable as opposed to like usually stockinette knitting curls and it's very stretchy and warps, and so this hangs on its own.
And you also have other, aren't you doing other experiments with knitting and other work with knitting?
Sure. I mean, actually, part of the why this is a very small piece. It's about the size of an overlarge postcard, and it takes a very, very long time to make each one, like a few months. So I'm knitting as we speak, and I'm doing right now a series of sort of illustrative lace work that gets starched over forms so it can be more sculptural. And also I can just boil it and change the shape if I decide it's not working so well.
I hope you share that with us coming up soon.
Yeah.
Sounds fascinating.
I did some small experiments which were really exciting, and now I'm working on sort of this sort of more realized, resolved work.
So we've gone from tar to lace and knitting. Somebody had a question, I'm sorry.
Laundry starch? Yeah, I have a question. Do you use laundry starch on your lace? Is that?
I've been using cornstarch.
Cornstarch.
Yeah, just from CVS next door, actually.
Yeah. I went to your website. I was so fascinated. I loved this so much. I really was interested in a lot of the things that you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Definitely a fascinating story and artist. Thank you for sharing all that.
Welcome.
And we're going to have another kind of art now. Neela Kuhn, yellow number 5 tunnel book. Like I said, there's just so many different things you all were doing. It's blowing my mind. This is inspired by Keith Smith, and he's a multi-talented artist, a photographer, printmaker, and bookmaker, and he creates books as works of arts. He also writes instructional texts on how to make a book, including how to do it without glue. And he's in many important museums throughout MoMA, LA County Museum of Art. And his emphasis is on process, because he thinks that's when the book is alive, as you're doing it. And he says the finished book is like a corpse, except it becomes alive again when the viewer starts opening it up. And then it's a dialogue between the viewer and the book. But the book itself just sitting there as a corpse. And he's done over 200 books, and his book 200 is actually an annotated bibliography documenting his previous 199 books. So anyway, you don't have to do them all, you can do the book 200. So I asked Nyla to explain the work, the title, how did Keith influence her, how did she first get started on bookmaking, and all of it's fascinating. So take it away.
Hi. My background is in sculpture, and then my graduate work was in photography. And I found that the book form was a good marriage for the two. It used flat areas, and it gave me a 3D playground. So this is a historic form, the tunnel book, and it goes back to the 1600s at least. They had so much time not watching TV or movies that they made their own little play sets, and each little page was a place for actors to be placed, and they could move them back and forth or take some actors off the stage completely. So that's where I started, and then I have the little lever. Sometimes I have 2, sometimes I have more, and that moves. And as you look through the tunnel, it changes, the lever changes how much you can see and what you're seeing. And Keith gave me permission to move around and take different parts, take parts of photographs or drawings, and just see what worked. And I really like his playfulness.
And she's a very, very successful book artist. Her her books are displayed in many, many places, including MoMA. Am I right about MoMA?
Yeah, it's in their collection. They have a really good artist book collection.
Well, it has to be really good. You're in there. So it does create some ideas about things that people can do collaboratively as books where people put in different pieces and pages. Maybe we'll talk later about that. Or maybe you're already talking to Susan about that, but it certainly does open up the idea of bookmaking and people putting on different things on pages.
And not being afraid of it, just
and not being afraid.
Seeing what happens.
Well, thank you very much. I love what you had to say, and I like your book. Carol Myers. I don't know if Carol, are you here, Carol? I don't know if she's here. Is Carol here? Well, this is another homage to Picasso, though in some ways, to me, it looked like maybe it was an homage to more like de Kooning, because more of the, wasn't necessarily angry, but more of the energy of the figure than Picasso's somewhat stylized places. One of the other things that made me think that it was more de Kooning, who was much influenced by abstract expressionism. If you look at the background, it's a very modeled background, very active background. It's more expressionistic. So maybe it was influenced by Picasso. Picasso certainly influenced de Kooning, and she's obviously influenced by both expressionists. I was curious whether she did the background first, and then because those jagged, dark marks for the figure intrigued me. But someday I'll ask her about it.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You are here.
Yeah.
Okay, talk about your picture.
All right. First of all, I must say that this is an old canvas that I just decided to paint over. So portions of it, like the yellow in the bottom of it, has been left from the other picture. I did put the sky in first, and then I believe I kind of marked in this face and the rest of it, and I'm always doing hands, so that's in there. And usually a few various faces appear, and you can see that there's about 4 or 5 faces in there.
What did you use for the black lines, Carol?
Charcoal, and then I spray it afterwards. After it's all finished, I spray it so that it won't run.
So the painting, is it acrylic in the background?
Yes, it is all acrylic. Mm-hmm.
Ah, interesting. Wow. Okay, so that had answered the question. I was wondering if the background came before the figure.
Yes.
And I like your jaggedy marks and stuff. And what do you spray? What do you like as a spray? I'm always looking for the best one, but which one is that?
Oh, I don't even know what I use as a spray.
Okay.
It's something that I've had for a long time.
Okay, like the canvas, right?
Yes. I take it outside and I try to spray it towards the wind and stand behind it so I'm not in the midst of the wind.
Right, very important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much. And Carol's also a member of the American Colored Print Society, and actually, aren't you the president?
Yes.
So
yes,
we're putting in another. Go ahead.
I just going to say that I work in partnership with Art Brenner with most of everything.
Oh, and I'm just putting in another plug for the show coming up in November.
Yeah.
Sure. And you'll see it on the website, but both of them are very active in that. And they do a service for printers that don't have everybody can't be in a museum. And this, by opening up the Plastic Club to these printmakers from across the way, it's really a service that the Plastic Club does for fellow artists.
Yes, and every year we give a free year membership to a PAFA printmaker graduates.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Kathleen Vaccaro, A Twist of Fate. So this is influenced by Andy Warhol, and I'm not going to go into a little blurb about Andy Warhol because people know a lot about Andy Warhol, but Kathleen Vaccaro, am I saying it right?
Oh yes, thanks, Roberta.
It's
Yeah.
so intriguing how this painting morphed, how it got created, how it changed, and all the elements in it. So could you go for, including the name, go for it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And thank you also to Art Brenner who told me about the show. So I just wrote down a couple notes. So yeah, I called this A Twist of Fate. And the image that I started with for this painting was a photo of Bogart and Bacall in the 1944 film To Have and Have Not. And in the film, they played two normal people who were caught in a world full of chaos during World War II. And due to this chaos, they find each other and are able to do extraordinary things, such as fighting for and supporting the resistance in France. And I've been interested in this concept as I've been making this body of work inspired by film noir. And that's where I pulled the title and the concept for this painting. And this also led me to the surreal idea of incorporating the ice cream twists into the image. And the ice cream is also a reference to the fact that these celebrities are often viewed as commodities. And I thought that kind of connected to Warhol's content as well, especially his gold Marilyn Monroe piece in MoMA. And so that was kind of my thoughts as I was making this piece.
Well, it was certainly a lot of thoughts and a lot of twists and turns into how you went about it. Her website is very, very interesting. She has an artist statement, which is very, very interesting. Definitely has a fresh point of view and a way of viewing things. So, look her up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Susan Plogue. Who? Where are you? I don't want to say you're not
okay,
here.
I'm unmuted. Oops, that orientation is wrong.
There you are.
That orientation is wrong. That is showing as a vertical, but it should be a horizontal.
Oh,
Can we
sorry
tweak
about
it?
that. I'll change it later.
Okay,
In other words, these leaves go up.
right, yeah. So if you cock your head, you'll see the way it goes.
But it's such a strong composition. It can go either way. I mean, really, it looks, I didn't even notice it initially. It is a strong and that's sometimes the mark of a very strong composition is you can turn it different ways. So whoever buys it can decide on how they want to show it. But so Morris' biography is very, very interesting. And Susan and I went through a bunch of emails because I just kept saying, how did he influence your work? He was he's an influence on the arts and crafts movement of the late 19th and 20th century in Victoria interior decoration. And earlier he was associated with the pre-Raphaelite artists who countered the ideas informed by Renaissance and classical periods. And if you want to see an amazing collection of the pre-Raphaelite artists, it's in the Delaware Art Museum. It's one of the best collections outside of London, and it will blow your mind. And anyway, when you can travel, go see it. He's a writer, a socialist, and a textile designer where he actually started focusing. And his paper can be found on some of the walls of the Delaware Art Museum. Anyway, so his later textiles were pretty stylized, and Susan's painting is not stylized, I did see some orange in there, and the pre-Raphaelites loved these models. A lot of them, they were the mistresses and models, had this red hair. So I said, okay, there's some red. And a lot of his textiles have green and blue. Okay. All right, Susan, cough it up. How did he influence you?
Well, I live in Rose Valley, number one, and that's an arts and crafts community. But I've always been interested in William Morris because I went to school for graphic design, and I'm very drawn to graphics. I'm also a gardener. So if you put, you know, gardens and graphic design together, you come up with William Morris. In his decorative arts, you'll often see birds, flowers, vines, and repeated, and they're so beautiful. They're very complex. And he believed that, you know, you don't copy nature, you're designing from nature. And so anyway, so therefore he would abstract, he would flatten, he would arrange. He was interested in those early herbals. You've probably all seen the early herbals where a plant, in order to see the way it's arranged, it would be sort of flattened out and made into these beautiful designs. He was looking at that. Well, anyway, so I go into a lot of gardens, and so often, especially in English gardens, so often I'm actually looking at the garden material, the plant material itself, and the growth form, and I'm thinking, you know, William Morris probably saw plants the way I'm seeing them right now, feeling like I'm seeing it through his eyes, with all the little textures and the way things fit together. In this instance, I was actually with my friend Phyllis, who did the Rousseau piece earlier. Phyllis was with me we were in Tuscany, and I just happened to, this is what I saw. I looked up into the sky, I was under a fig tree, and the way that the leaves and the figs were silhouetted against the sky, it already looked like an arrangement. So all I needed to do was to compose it, you know, to tweak the composition and go at it with watercolor. Now you would if this was more naturalistic, you probably would see veining and you would see some transparency and so on. But in William Morris's world, you are the designer, and so there it is, you know. So it's a pretty straightforward thing. It's just kind of interested in patterns and contrast, repetition, and being a gardener.
Yeah, no, great. And once I got it back, I said, okay, there's the story. And the painting is really quite lovely. And I could see what you were talking about. So, you know, you can't go by those bios about why somebody's inspired, because the inspiration just starts triggering ideas, triggering how you see things. And obviously it really keeps Susan keep looking at things and exploring things. And I think just how your process is very inspiring for all of us, especially when you're going to do something for local inspirations.
Well, maybe I'll design a wallpaper.
Am I reminding you?
My garden.
Yeah, do your wallpaper. Okay.
Thanks, Roberta.
Author Ostroff had done an homage, and it's actually a double homage because it's to a site that really needs an homage. It shows how art can capture things that may not stand the mark of time. Art may not either, but it's a possibility. Sometimes art outlasts what's the topic. So Art, can you talk about your homage to Anne? I see you. Do we need to unmute him? Arthur, we can't hear you. Can you unmute him?
Hey, there, I'm here.
If you started, start again. It'll be like, you know, a series.
I made my first visit to Paris in 1961 in the autumn, did a lot of sketching, and I did a quick color sketch of Notre Dame. And that's when I became obsessed with it. After I did the sketch, I realized maybe I can do something similar to Monet. And over the years, I worked in oil and watercolor and pen and ink, trying to get it quote unquote right. And then in 1985, I was preparing for a solo show in Brussels, and I needed a vertical watercolor for a poster. The posters were the main publicity medium in those days, that they went all over town. So that's where the original Monet, if you will, appeared. I was finished with it, I thought, put it aside, and then last year during the tragic Notre Dame de Paris fire, I kind of resuscitated it, and people were buying prints, and I even made a small fridge magnet. But then going further on, about 5 years ago, I started using Illustrator special effects, making different moods of one image. Those of you who are Facebook friends are well aware of how I will swipe somebody's image and then do a series of montages like this. So this is basically what I did. The original is in the center, top center, and then I went around making different moods of that same image. Oh, for watercolorists, in case you happen to be interested, that lovely pale blue is a mix of cobalt blue and raw umber.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. I mean, it's interesting with Monet. What he did was he rented a room across from the western facade of the church where he kept multiple canvases in progress, and he worked on them as light shifted. Lucky author, he could stay in his studio and just click on his computer and change it. Anyway, thank you very much for sharing. This certainly had a history for you that evolved, including from the disastrous fire. Well, we're gonna start with a series of figure paintings. The first one is, and then there are gonna be about 6 of them coming up. If we're gonna start with Kim Cowperthwaite. Did I say it right?
Thank you.
Kim's image is called "The Wearer is Entitled to Tell the Future," inspired by Lorna Simpson. And she's a well-recognized artist who challenges through her photography. She combines words. She challenges the conventional ideas about women, culture, and race. And she often works in a series, including using glossy ads from old editions of Ebony. So I saw this very intriguing picture because you have to look through this luminous color and you find this head. What does this title mean? So I was just interested, Kim, how did you approach this work? Did you work in a series? Did you use glossy ads? How did Lorna Simpson influence you?
Thanks. So I've been looking at her work, especially her collage work in the Earth and Sky series that she's been doing for about 6 years. And she uses a glossy image, usually of a woman's face, and then creates this space around her, often kind of looking like hair. So I starting to explore this. So this is the only one. There's no series, just this single exploration.
What's your medium? What medium are you using?
So this is it's a collage, and then there's acrylic paint on it, and then on top of the acrylic paint, I put tracing paper. So to add this whole other layer.
Well, the tracing paper, that's how you got that pushback and that luminosity.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
See where I folded it down at the very top corner?
Uh-huh.
And kind of a happy accident as that happened. It just reads to me that as if the page is turning on this. So it was just an exciting experiment, and I'm glad to share it.
It's a lovely experiment. I mean, it was very striking. I kept going back to it, and it certainly made me interested in. I didn't know much about Lorna Simpson, and that was also interesting to see hers and that photography up there with those, what she does with those are very, very interesting. So I thank you on 2 or 3 different levels.
Thank you.
Back. So could I have the 21 through 5? It's a figure grouping. So I'm grouping together, this is 4 of them, for figures, because it shows the flexibility that we as artists have in approaching the subject of the figure. These artists all explored the figure, reflecting or inspired by different artists. And we'll have each of the different artists talk about them. And I'd ask them to address what elements attracted them to the artist they used as an inspiration. What elements in their painting reflects more about them than the artist they used as the inspiration? How did the medium affect what they did? And did they work from a model, a photo, memory, or imagination? So I'm going to start with Pamela Tudor, and hers is 100 Years Later, and it's Modigliani. And she also was influenced by Avery. And both of those artists use big shapes. Modigliani uses elongated figures, but this is very clearly her own work, and it's a collage, which I found very interesting. She was able to do so much with not that many different big shapes. So could you tell us about your work? But before you begin, she's not just an artist, she's also on a board of a very interesting organization. And I would like you to do a shout out to that, please.
Sure. I'm the chair of the board of Rock to the Future, and we provide free music lessons and academic tutoring to underserved students in the Philadelphia area. So as most of us know, there's hardly any music education in public schools.
Right.
And so we could say that just about all the students in the Philadelphia area are underserved in that regard.
Right.
And we've been doing this for 10 years. Our founder, Jessica Crafts, started it on a wing and a prayer. And now 100% of our graduating seniors went on to post-secondary school. So that's close to a miracle. And they don't necessarily become musicians. It's just learning how to play in a band. It's mostly rock music, gives them confidence and a sense of themselves and a sense of self-worth. And we help them with academic tutoring as well. So it's really a wonderful program. rocktothefuture.org.
Yeah, it just blew my mind. You know, I'm just looking up, you know, I look up the artist, I look up the person, and I said, oh, well, let's click on the organization. Whoa, what a mission. And yeah. I mean, it's, you know, maybe sometime we could have, I don't know, you know, explore the possibility. We oftentimes have musicians doing things on a Sunday. Maybe we could do something with your musicians. Sometimes we have, when they're practicing, we do sketches. I don't know, it's something to talk about later.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
Anyway, look at her website for the organization. It is, under any circumstances, so worthwhile. Okay, let's go back to your to your painting. She's also a painter and a collagist, a number of other things. Go ahead, Jean.
So this is based, actually, it started out being based on a red-headed girl with in an evening dress, the Modigliani painting. I actually made a copy here for those of you who might not be familiar with it, that can't seem to find, but it's in the Barnes collection. And a couple of years ago, the Barnes invited Philadelphia artists to come and wander through the Barnes and choose a painting that inspired them and do a riff on it. So that's how this got started. And I love Modigliani. I always find his work so poignant and so just beautiful and touching. And so I had this idea, since I'm more of an abstract painter, I sort of skirt the line between abstraction and figurative work. I had this thought of what she might look like in an abstract way 100 years later. He died in 1920, so it is just 100 years later. And so as I thought about it, I wanted to really make it a complete abstraction, but because I was so interested in the shapes and the forms, I started with a photograph of myself. I don't know if you could see this, but I took a photograph in the position of the girl with the redheaded girl in the evening dress so that I could get the shapes really clearly. And that evolved. And as it evolved, I made drawings and actually some small paintings. But to get the blockiness that I was interested in, the shapes and the movement, I decided to do a collage. It was also smaller than I usually work. It's 12 by 12. So it helped to be able to use cut paper. This piece has rice paper, painted paper that I've painted. Her dress is actually wallpaper. So it sort of has that sheen of some silk wallpaper and colored paper. So as I worked on this, I kept thinking of what that model would be like 100 years later. And in Modigliani's work, she looks kind of retiring and maybe world weary, maybe a bit, here it is, maybe a bit of the morning after the night before. But I wanted to do something that was more of a modern woman, somebody who will look at you forthrightly, who's been through it, but who can take a stand and say, here I am. And as the more I worked on it, the more I realized this wasn't going to be a self-portrait. This would be every woman for our time. And that's why there's no features on the face. And yes, Milton Avery is also one of my influences. I love his work. So I was interested in how I could both portray this and keep it abstract and have something that makes a statement about a modern woman and frankly, feminism and taking our stand in the world. Also, I love color. So this is much more colorful than the Modigliani. It's much brighter. And I just enjoyed piecing that together. So.
Such a perfect story for the 125th anniversary of the founding of the Plastic Club. Their tale of every woman. So I certainly thank you for that. And it's very, very powerful. I see there's another Tudor here, Jean Tudor. Is that
that's my sister?
To you?
That's
welcome.
My sister.
She does good work, doesn't she? Okay, thank you so much. And I hope sounds like there's plenty of inspiration you'll have for the next exhibit, local. Okay, never mind. I'm beating a dead horse. So next person, Joyce Siberlin. So I want to welcome Joyce. Joyce and I are so sad to say we're just stuck on Martha's Vineyard now. And I've known Joyce for a number of years. And Joyce, I got her to think about the Plastic Club. She did participate in the round robin collage effort. And I said, come on, you're doing work all the time. It's free, you don't have to frame it. Put a picture in. And so do you want to tell us about your inspiration and your methodology? I just want to say one thing about, if you notice a strong composition that she has, it's the figure with the bottom, it's a yellow layer. It doesn't show up too well on my screen anyway. You end up having a very strong cruciform composition that really focuses on your figure. But you want to tell us about your medium and your influence and how you differ.
As you can see, I was influenced in this by Manuel Neri. Neri was primarily, to start with anyway, a sculptor. And in fact, his second studio is in Carrera. So he went to the source, so to speak, for his materials. But most of his figure work is the feminine form. And, but what I really took from his work was just putting the figure out there as the story. He didn't obviously feel that he had to tell us more about it. He let us either add to that story or just let it be and observe the figure. So I did my figure, and I've done a series of them now, as monoprints. And this was done with water-based Aquacolor. And I used only sponge brush on. I didn't put any other brush or any other instrument on. I just added or subtracted with the sponge brush on this. And I like doing the prints, especially on the figure, but all prints, because I feel that you can do your best in creating your plate, but then you must give it up and you must surrender to the gods, so to speak, and put it into the press or make your imprint however you do. And I usually am delighted by the outcome and feel that there has been some mystical addition to whatever I was trying to put down there. I was not influenced directly in terms of trying to copy any Neri work. I love to do a form, and I've been doing a lot lately of what I consider young man. And maybe it's the influence of a growing grandson, but I think the influence is more the feeling, certainly in this day and age, that our future is dependent on these strong upcoming young people. And so I like to do the figures that are maybe not with great detail, but that are facing a future. We don't know what their future is. They don't know what their future is, but they are facing it and they're not afraid to face it.
That's a very uplifting way to end. We're all facing forward right now on this Zoom. And thank you. John, I'm going to say it wrong. Atanasio.
Atanasio.
Yeah, thank you.
Atanasio.
You know, I'm bad. You should see how I pronounce French. His is entitled Morning, and he's inspired. You could see, you say, oh, Edward Hopper. But I liked I thought I was intrigued by his woman, who doesn't look so browbeaten and dejected and hopeless as some of Hopper's women. I don't know if you felt that same way, John. If you could just talk about what you did and why you call it Morning, if that's optimistic or not.
Let me start first with, I have to say that this started out as a model at a workshop at the Sketch Club. I painted the woman. Pardon me? No, it could have been anywhere. But I started out not intending this to resemble Edward Hopper in any way. I didn't have a message. I wanted to paint the figure as I usually do, a realist kind of point of view. And I did not choose the actual pose. She was facing some light. I painted her. And it sat around in my studio for probably about a year as just the model. And I then looked at it and thought, this is Edward Hopper. I mean, the model is in a Hopper type pose. She does look very determined and very focused and not as despondent looking as many Edward Hopper models are, although she is focused and not, it's difficult to determine what her real mood is. But anyway, I saw Edward Hopper in my figure, and I would also say along with that, that since I've been painting now for about 7 or 8 years, and from the very beginning, many people who have seen my paintings call it Hopper-esque. So Actually, I find myself accidentally painting Edward Hopper, Hopper-esque paintings when I do figures or even houses or buildings. I tend to have a little bit of Edward Hopper in me. So I looked at this and thought it really needs to be finished. I thought the figure was very good and I wanted to make it something. So I figured out how I could. The challenge in this painting was getting a bed into that little bit of space I had left around the portrait. So I figured out I was probably inspired by the painting that you displayed next to mine, and I made this a Hopper-esque painting. So that's what I was inspired by. The model was there, and I created a Hopper-esque feel about it.
You did a great job. You certainly succeeded on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next one is with Gwen Harper, who's not mastered Zoom. But I just wanted to, she told me why she did the Milkmaid by Vermeer. She said, I wanted to take a picture of somebody that was a working woman. And so that was why she used this picture of the Milkmaid. And even though there's, Vermeer has these blocks, very geometrical blocks, she abstracted blocks of color and did a pretty sophisticated painting. Anyway, thank you, Gwen. We hope to see you on Zoom one day. Irene Frankie, she's not able to be with us, but she did tell me what inspired her. What she said is she wanted to reflect her desire to incorporate age. This is how she's going to be different from Modigliani. Her nude has gray hair and eye bags, and she also kept armpit hair, which felt very sensual to her. She used a photo from a Modigliani art book, but used herself as a model. So, we've had a series of figures, different approaches, different philosophies, very exciting ways to be looking at it. I hope that this helps perk ideas in all of your heads when we get back to the workshops with the model. Carol Tajin, I'm not going to pronounce the name of her painting. Well, I'll try. Ishnathia. And she was influenced by none other than Plastic Club member Anders Hansen. So she, without using color, has a wide range of values with her pen and ink painting. And I looked up Ichenia, I'm just pronouncing it, but they thought that it had medicinal properties to strengthen the immune system. So I thought that's why she probably did this, because it's the time of the pandemic. But for a change, I was wrong. So Carol, can you talk about the influence of Anders, how you're different, and what was the source of your inspiration?
Thank you. So I made this drawing. I have this plant in my backyard. It's a perennial, and it comes back every year, and I've been looking at it for years now.
Can you pronounce the name?
I say it differently than you, but I don't know that it's right either.
You pronounce it echinacea.
I say echinacea, yeah. So, and I don't know if that's correct or not.
She's the gardener.
Oh, the gardener said then that it's echinacea. Good. So I'm saying it correctly. And I started this drawing. I mean, I always have a drawing going. So, but I've really been influenced and inspired by the way Anders portrays nature. And particularly, I love this one. And in fact, I just noticed some compositional elements that are similar between the two drawings that I hadn't thought about. I don't really set out to sort of copy what Anders does, because Anders does Anders' work, and I have my own desires for my drawings. But I am really influenced by the way he observes and responds to nature, and then creates this drawing that's it can be very abstract. I mean, you can see on this piece that there's a lot of abstraction, and but his paintings to me are always drawn. So one thing about Andrew's work is that even when it's charcoal and ink, it feels very much like a painting. So I just call them a painting, even though I guess technically they're drawings. But there's a whole convincing world that he's created in them that I think has to do with how he looks at nature and responds to it, and responds to what I think it's a much more active. It feels more active than just looking at nature and trying to capture all the details that you see. And I'm still sort of a little bit locked into that. Like I need to make sure these echinacea look like echinacea, and but at a certain point, it's been really liberating for me to pull away from just spending time chasing the details and never feeling like they're right, and saying, now what do I want for this particular drawing? And while I'm thinking about that, I think about often, not just with this drawing, but often with other drawings as well, is the way Anders works, and what he produces from what he's observed, because I know he works on site.
I have to say, Carol, whenever I see your work in the exhibits, I see his work, I don't say there's Anders' work. I mean, you are very, very distinctive, amazing artists, and you have walked around with some judges, and you have been awarded some Plastic Club prizes, and they respond to the painterly quality when you were saying that the painterly, when you said it was a painting, it's a very painterly kind of work. You end up using very strong, I mean, you could do those in, I don't ever look at these as just charcoal when you just do charcoal or charcoal and ink. I would call it a painting also. They're just very strong, and your compositional skills are incredible. I mean, you have these L's of, these L's on the corners and the bottom left and the top right, and that's a very, very strong compositional element. You have like a triangle and diagonals. You're very, very, I mean, I look at this and say, wow, that's another wonderful painting by Carol.
Thank you. Well, I thank Anders, and so when because I have, as I said, his work is an influence. He was an influence on me, and again, I try to do what I do, but when
you do what you do. Hey, you do what you do.
Yeah, when the theme for this exhibition came up, I had just finished this drawing, and I thought this is perfect, and like I have my submission for this one. So anyway, thank you, Anders. I know you're out there, and I went to the Edmund Forsyth Wildlife Preserve for the first time last week, or the week before. So, because you had told me about that place as well. So I didn't draw there, but we hiked around.
So I'm not sure that Anders came, so I'm going to put your source of inspiration. He was inspired by Delacroix. And
oh, wow.
Anders, were you here? I don't know.
Here.
Huh? Yeah, I put you at the end on purpose. You said you might pop in. Here you are.
I have to say I'm incredibly humbled by Carol's putting me as the influence, and I just wish you had talked much more about yourself than about me. I think you're a wonderful artist, and let me remind everybody, you won the gold medal last year, and deservedly so.
Yes, those were the jurors I was talking about. I was with.
I'm every bit as inspired by Carol's work as
well. Carol's humility should be inspiring too. So
absolutely, and I have several of her pieces, and including one for which she made the frame. There was a show at Frank's. She had a number of pieces in there, and she'd made the frames for all of them. It's a total work of art, including the frame. But Carol is one of the gems of the Plastic Club, in my opinion.
And that's saying a lot, because we were like a jewelry collection.
Exactly.
The Plastic Club is a wonderful place. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you went to the Forsyth. We should have a discussion
later.
without the group, but that's my favorite place on earth. So,
So we're gonna pretty soon, so Anders was influenced by both Delacroix and interesting with Jonathan Swift with the, why don't you talk about that? And then I have still life still to go. People will bear with us.
I'll make it very quick. I'll make it very quick. I have been given some powdered graphite by a dear friend, and I loved playing with it, and especially doing big pieces. And so I had a big piece of paper. It's 38 by 50 or something, and I just wanted to draw with the powdered graphite. And as I was doing it, I saw the semblance of what it could have been a horse's head at the top. So I decided to work that and actually try to create a horse's head. And I was aided by a Dover animal physiology book that gave me a clue about how a horse's eye is structured. And so I was pretty happy with that. And I felt that the horse was looking at me. And also in the course of the drawing, which I wanted to be dramatic, I thought about the wonderful and sad, actually, Delacroix paintings of, there's several of horses being attacked by lions or tigers. There's an Arab horseman with the horses being under attack. And Géricault also did that. It must have been a genre in 19th century French art. So I just thought I would try to hint at something attacking the horse's back. If you look at it closely, which you can't do here, there are an intimation of claws and so forth, but just a brief hint. And so in searching for a title, I suddenly, with the horse sort of looking at me, I thought, well, kind of like the human condition. And that, I just thought of Gulliver's Travels and the Land of the Houyhnhnms. I don't know how it's pronounced, but I think this is the land where the civilized creatures are horses and the barbaric human creatures are yahoos, which has come down to us today. And I just picture, I imagine Swift thought of it as, the word Houyhnhnm is almost unspellable, but I think of it as a horse whinnying. So that's it. I'll bow out. And
it's a very powerful piece. I mean, I loved it. And I loved looking up about Gulliver. It was very a lot of fun. So I have the next, if people would, it's a grouping of still lifes that we have, and the people are here to talk about them. So I hope that people will stay. One reason why I grouped them together is there's a whole movement on still lifes coming back into popularity in the mid-19th century, because the middle class all of a sudden had money to spend, but these were more affordable, they're smaller. But a lot of the artists themselves like this genre. 1/5 of Manet's paintings were still lifes, which he considered the touchstone of painting. He stated, a painter can say all he wants to with fruits or fishes or even clouds. Cézanne stated, painting from nature is not copying the object, it is realizing one's own sensations. Andrew Wyeth, known as the realist, understood what Cézanne meant. Wyeth stated, my objects breathe in a different way. There's another core, an excitement that's definitely abstract. My God, when you begin to peer into something, a simple object, and realize the profound meaning of that thing, if you have an emotion about it, there's no end. Well, that's a very, very contemporary notion of that you can do everything you want with just a small world. You think about Jasper Johns painting his targets and flags. That was how he was able to say everything he wanted to say about painting at that point. So I have a couple of, we have artists here that I would like to have them briefly just discuss what was it that they were saying with their still life and what attracted them. So the first one, what do you have as the first numbered one? Okay, so that is Stephanie Tier. I don't know, are you still here? Stephanie? Maybe not. Okay, next one. Well, go ahead, next one. So Jean Renzi with Peaches. Jean, I have a question for you after you discuss this painting. As I was looking at it and getting ready for this presentation, honest to goodness, I kept seeing a head with your shadows that was forming this woman head around those peaches. So is that just me crazy, or is that there?
No, I don't think so. What it was, the painting of Cezanne at the Barnes was the inspiration. And I did get the peaches, and they were just larger than normal, you know? Normally they're small, these were larger, and it just made me think of Cezanne, and I did the painting, and I didn't want to have, the peaches were the focal point, and that's why I just used a white drapery and the pale blue background. Just the peaches were the whole thing.
Well, it's quite lovely, and we all recognize that chair from an earlier painting. That's your famous iron metal chair outside, right?
Right, that's the setting, yeah. Why not paint outside when it's nice, you know?
Yep. Well, it's a very nice painting, and it certainly did focus. Though for the life of me, I do see this woman embracing these pears, these peaches, I mean. Okay. What is the next one? Anita Brodsky, are you here?
Yes, I am. And I just want to say, well, thank you so much for making me feel so welcome. This is my first time ever doing this.
Oh, well, we welcome you.
I am new to painting, and I'm just loving today and how humbly every artist is talking. Just so beautiful. I'm just overwhelmed. But when I think of Cezanne, I love to see what he saw. And I'm a nervous wreck when I even try to draw or paint. And so I always ask myself, Anita, what do you see? And it helps me to start. So it amazes me how we can all be in the same room and see the same thing, and the creativity is endless and limitless. So while Cezanne's work, as you're seeing on the right, oh, how beautiful the work that you picked out. His works still I've always seemed like the fruit's gonna fall right out of the canvas. Right. Mine kind of naturally float into air. And he also was quoted as saying, you used a quote by him, he's quoted as saying, with an apple, I will astonish Paris. Well, I don't have an apple, but with my little green teapot, I love still life, and I sort of, in homage to him, titled my work similar to his work. And I hope to humbly inspire, not too astonishing, but I hope to humbly inspire someone else who wants to take a first step or first brushstroke. And just like John, you were told that you have a little Harper in you. When people see my work, they say you have a little Cezanne in you, and I couldn't be more humbly appreciative.
What I liked in yours, Anita, is a very architectural feeling. Your, if you look at the fabric, it feels very solid. I mean, not soft. And it seemed to echo this very solid teapot, and the background, which is a lovely background. It feels almost like a cityscape. I mean, I just feel this very architectural, very concrete sense of imagery going on. And I think it just really anchors and makes you a very strong painter.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Who's our next one? Oh, well, Kim Scheinbaum. What do we see here? Color, 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 texture, texture, texture. Kim, go ahead, tell us about this. I know you're here.
I had to unmute myself. Can you see me, Roberta? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. I was muted. Roberta, I want to thank you, of course, for selecting Cloudcroft flowers, but I'll be brief. I was an art heathen all my life until a few years ago, but 20 years ago, I went to see a Van Gogh exhibit, and Van Gogh's marvelous. There were so many marvelous things, but the one thing that became embedded in my hippocampus was sunflowers. And apparently Van Gogh has done many versions of those sunflowers. So when I turned to art a few years ago, I looked in all the wrong places to do something similar. And I went into hotels and took photographs of the fancy things and restaurants. And eventually I went to Cloudcroft Gallery. It's an art gallery in New York State on a large farm. They have their own garden. And they always have a vase of their own flowers on the table of the exhibit. So this particular thing attracted me in every way. It had a simplicity, which I'd sought, but I hadn't found in all those beautiful, hotels where they have these marvelous flower things. And it had the color, and it had the potential for the exuberance and the energy that I think Van Gogh has in his sunflowers. So Cloudcroft Flowers for me was, I finally found my Van Gogh.
So it definitely has,
years of artisan.
it has energy and exuberance.
Correct. Yeah. Did you see my notes? That was in my notes. Yeah, it had the energy and exuberance that actually I had sought my whole life.
Well, you certainly were able to achieve it. You sometimes work in series. Is this part of a series or?
Well, I do have lots of, no, this is the only, yes, I took many pictures of vases, but the flowers were very ornate. So I would never exhibit all the things I did. This is the only thing that of my vase portfolio that I would ever show in public.
Well,
the rest are,
fabulous.
hidden away somewhere. And that's it, really.
It definitely was worth that journey.
Is this a painting or a photograph?
This is actually a photograph. This is a photograph.
Okay.
It's not a painting. It's a digitally altered photograph.
Right. I mean, I think you quite altered it a lot. I mean, it ends up being, I know from some of your other work, you work hard on getting the effect that you're trying to achieve. And
well, I'll
it's worth the journey.
There's a little detail I'd like to point out, which is that the humility of a vase of sunflowers that Van Gogh did. But this particular vase actually has very humble flowers. Yes, it has the sunflowers, but look at the rest. The goldenrod, it's a weed. Goldenrod is a weed. And the gallery put it, and now they use it as their logo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It was worth the journey.
Yeah, they use it as the logo for Cloudcroft Gallery.
I'm not sure. Do I have one more still life, Tina? This is the last one, right?
I believe so.
I don't think that Carol's here. I know that she's not here. So this is just a different way of, the homage. She has it, the focus is on Manet, and there's a, stylistically, the cruciforms go towards him, the lamp, the flowers. Anyway, it's a very lovely homage. Okay, so we're going to call it end. And Susan, I know you have very few announcements, just reminders. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry I went over.